It's a privilege to introduce Peter Guenther to you as a 2016 Blazer Award winner, a recognition I believe he richly deserves. Peter came to CMBC in 1966, directly after completing his high school in Osler, Saskatchewan. He may not have taken CMBC on fire right away, but he was immediately recognized as someone who was solid, someone who had tremendous potential, someone who would do much. I was a fellow student of his. In fact, I had the privilege of actually meeting him some 6 months prior to his coming to CMBC, when I was involved in a recruitment trip in Osler and met him, and we visited about whether he should come to CMBC. I was already impressed. Following his CMBC studies, he completed a BA at the University of Saskatchewan and then a master's in criminology at University of Ottawa. That latter degree set the direction for his life's work as he devoted the next 39 years to the corrections system, including stints as director of the Saskatchewan Correctional Centre, warden of the Prince Albert Penitentiary, and executive director of the Regional Psychiatric Centre in Saskatoon. In these roles, he was experienced as compassionate and principled, as a respected leader who worked to reduce harm, violence, and recidivism. An article about him in the National Post represented him as an alternative narrative of warm and compassionate correction manager, someone who actually liked the people he worked with, who did the right thing, or at least tried to. Guess he wasn't quite perfect. The passion for social justice and helping those in need, along with his leadership capabilities, also shaped his volunteer work. For 16 years, he served as chair of Mental Homes of Saskatchewan and has served on various MCC boards and continues working as the co-chair of the Saskatchewan Relief Sale Committee. Even his hobby in woodworking is used to support others, as he has made furniture and donated it to charity auctions for Rostern Junior College, Shekinah Retreat Centre, and MCC. He and his wife, Marilyn, have 3 children, all of whom attended CMBC or CMU, and one of their daughters-in-law. They're active members at the Nutana Mennonite Church in Saskatoon. When I think about Peter and the work you have done and who you have been, it seems to me you very well represent the CMU mission statement as providing leadership in church and society in the ministry of reconciliation. Peter.
Thank you very much, Gerald, for that kind introduction. That's pretty much my speech, so. I first came to this campus, as Gerald said, 50 years ago as a rather naive and shy farm boy, but it's very good to be back, so thank you for inviting me. My experiences at CMBC had a very major impact on my life, and I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes, but first I want to tell you a little bit of my work in corrections and tell you a few stories. Early in my, or just before I go there, my first introduction to corrections actually was at the Prince Albert Correctional Centre after my first year at CMBC. I don't think that was a very popular summer job for students at that time, but anyway, that's what I did, and the warden at that time was actually Edgar Epp, another Mennonite, and the director of corrections was Otto Dreger, another Mennonite, and the minister in charge of corrections was David Bolt, also another Mennonite, so we were okay. Very early in my career, just shortly after I'd been appointed as deputy director at the Regina Correctional Centre, and I might have been walking a little extra tall around that time. Anyway, I was walking through an area where the men were just gathering to pick up their noon meal. And one of the offenders yelled out to me and says, "Hey, Guenther, in the eyes of the good Lord, I'm just as good as you are, and just as important as you are." Somewhat surprised, I said, "I agree with you, Bill." And Then he once again said, and you know what? I once was somebody. So later on, I had an opportunity to have a conversation with Bill, a bit more privately, and found that he had been a sales representative for a major shoe manufacturing company and for a number of years, and eventually, or over the years, he developed an addiction to alcohol, lost his family, lost his job, and ended up on the street and then many times in prison. Bill's story was not unique, but his admonition to me has stuck with me. My primary focus as a corrections manager was to encourage and assist offenders to deal with their issues and in their lives, and that led to their offending behavior. Over the long term, this would lead to, in my belief, and the objective of corrections was to reduce the harm to society. So I also always looked for opportunities to involve community partners to assist offenders in their reintegration into community in a positive way. So I was very pleased to be able to play a leadership role in working with community agencies such as the Elizabeth Fry Society and the Gabriel Dumont Institute to develop the first halfway house for women in Saskatchewan. This program gave me an opportunity they gave the offenders an opportunity to be closer to their children and the rest of their family and access community resources in their healing journey. By the way, it took me 5 requests to government to have that approved, 5 years in a row. So, a little stubborn. As Executive Director at the Regional Psychiatric Centre, which is an accredited hospital and affiliated with the University of Saskatchewan and is also a federal penitentiary, I witnessed the lives of many offenders change in a positive way. The evidence-based interventions that were provided to offenders in this facility and the skills helped them in developing skills in dealing with their offending behavior as well as to deal with their mental health issues. It gave them tools and assistance to manage their illness. This facility also provided intensive intervention for sex offenders and of the sex offenders who were of the highest risk. Some of these offenders now are supported through the support and guidance of COSA volunteers to prevent further harm to society. Indigenous men and women are way overrepresented in correctional facilities in the prairies, and this is certainly also the case at Saskatchewan Penitentiary in Prince Albert, where I was the warden for 3.5 years. Like most federal institutions, this facility provided a full range of evidence-based correctional intervention, and I was fortunate to also have the services of a group of very wise and amazing elders, Indigenous elders, who worked alongside us and alongside the other professionals in the institution. They gave hope and inspiration to offenders, and as they discovered or rediscovered their cultural ways and spiritual beliefs. They helped offenders to confront the harm they had caused and guided them on their healing journey. In contrast to much of what we do as professionals, they used a much more holistic approach to healing and saw the importance of involving family and community in this healing journey, in this healing process, and also in decision making. I'll talk about that in a minute. Typically, I made decisions about offenders in terms of their security level, whether they would be housed in a maximum security facility, medium security, or minimum security, and also made decisions about offenders who would get temporary absences. And normally that would be done in a boardroom setting after I would listen to all the people who were involved with the particular case and make a decision. On several occasions, the elders asked if I would be open to doing a talking circle as a decision-making process. So I agreed, and the one case I recall particularly was a very serious offender, and he had asked to be moved from medium security to minimum, and which it eventually would lead to parole and then full release into the community. So they impressed on me that they needed to have all of the community or number of community members there, his wife, and other communities that had been harmed by, or people in the community who had been harmed by his behavior. So we did, and we had a talking circle, and we began with a smudge and a prayer, and then went around, I think, twice. And what we had agreed is that if the talking circle turned out the way I had hoped that they had hoped that it would, then I would be the last person to speak, and I would not so much make the decision, but rather voice what the decision was, because the circle should have determined what the decision would be. And as it turned out, that's what it was. So it was a wonderful experience for me and a good model in terms of how we should make decisions. While I was at Saskatchewan Penitentiary, I also had the support of the person-to-person program. Many Mennonites from around the community would come to visit offenders for every month for years and years, and this was a huge support to the offenders. So my experiences at CMBC did have a major impact on my life, including my work in corrections. Walter Jansen's introduction to the Old Testament piqued my interest in the Old Testament, and I took several more Old Testament courses after that. In fact, that became my favorite area of study while I was at CMBC. I was struck by the concepts of covenant, promise and fulfillment, and particularly also struck by the concept or the biblical justice, which included economic and social justice. I came to understand that the meaning of biblical justice included all of those. Jesus' teaching as recorded in the New Testament and the other New Testament teachings further impressed on me the biblical imperative to reach out to those who needed help and to those who were marginalized. For me, Micah 6 verse 8 says, summarizes what I needed to do, which says, "O man, what is good and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God." To me, the elders at, sorry, I don't know why this is happening, but anyway, the elders at Saskatchewan Penitentiary epitomized that for me. I don't know if they were familiar with Micah 6 verse 8, but they certainly knew what it meant. At CMBC, I also learned to think critically and look beyond immediate answers to tough questions. It was a supportive community where you could explore issues and to think about how Anabaptist faith would apply to complex issues. At CMBC, I also discovered and was a chance to develop my leadership skills on the dorm council in the second year. I don't know if that was so much leadership as it was fun, but and in my second year as student president, and again, I'm not sure whether nobody else wanted to do it or I was chosen, but anyway, it gave me an opportunity to learn and practice being a leader. I've had the opportunity to apply what I learned at CMBC beyond my career as well, and have an interest in board governance, and recently completed 19 years on the board of Mental Homes of Saskatchewan, and 16 of those years as chair. This is an agency that provides residential and social and employment supports to adults with special needs. Today, I finished my second term as board member at the MCC Canada Board. In all the years that I worked in criminal justice, and the criminal justice has been likely the most troubling and the most distressing aspect of that work was the overrepresentation of Indigenous people in the criminal justice system. The even more disturbing fact that came to light during that time, which interestingly that Rudy Weeb is here today, that he wrote so eloquently about in a book that he co-authored with Johnson, I forget her first name. Anyway, that most of the offenders were victims long before they were offenders. And this is truly distressing to me as I read their files. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission has focused our attention to much of this victimization and the other injustices done to Aboriginal offenders or Indigenous offenders, and what needs to be done for reconciliation to occur. I am optimistic that things will change, and I'm also delighted by the work that CMU now does to educate students on this essential area and to the wider community in terms of Indigenous history and culture, and help us to think critically about what can be done to be reconciled with our Indigenous neighbors and to make a more just society. Thank you for nominating me for this award, and thank you for the opportunity to present.